Welcome back to Beauty Marks Podcast, a space where we embrace our marks acquired through our journey. My name is Elizabeth Savillon, and welcome to another episode of this podcast. On this week's episode, I have Campbell, which she is a trauma therapist, author, speaker, and the founder of the Healing Circle Therapy and Wellness Center. I am very excited to speak to her today because I've been following her along her journey with her podcast that she has, The Healing Circle, and just now her being an author. And I would love to just welcome Kobe on the podcast. Welcome to Beauty Marks Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. How are you feeling?
Good. I'm excited too. The listeners don't know, but this has been in the works for a minute.
Yes.
So I'm excited that we're finally here.
Yes. And for those that don't know, you can share what you're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. I am really passionate about mental health and faith and integrating the two. I'm really passionate about helping Christians see how God walks with them along the journey. I'm really passionate about helping people heal trauma, regardless of what their religious beliefs are. I truly believe that healing is something that all of us can experience and all of us need in some way, shape, or form. And so my heart is like, there's like a question someone asked, I think it's like on Instagram or TikTok or something. And it was like, what could you talk about for 30 minutes uninterrupted? And I was like, trauma. That's what I could do. Trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're the expert on that. And I think it's just, I love how you put therapy or trauma work and God together. I feel like it's like that has like been mind blowing even in my life, just seeing how like I grew up in church, but like trauma and therapy was still very taboo. And so now putting both together and being like, God literally is with us through our pain, and he helps us and he gives us tools and people that we can walk through those hard moments with, and to learn like there's things that like patterns and things that we have that sometimes we don't understand why. And so I feel like therapy to me has been so like life-changing because I see how like all of it is works together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you wrote your book, Why Am I Like This? Like how to break cycles and heal from trauma and restore your faith. And so I actually bought a copy. And so
Oh my gosh, thank you.
working through it and just kind of seeing how a lot of those things, even though I have done some work, there's things that like pop up continuously in our lives. And I love how you shared like your vulnerable just what you've walked through. And so with someone that maybe has like that thought of like, man, I'm in these cycles of toxic cycles, dysfunctional cycles, like how can someone pinpoint when that is a toxic or dysfunctional cycle and like to kind of get to the core of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I'm helping my clients realize that a cycle is not beneficial to them or that it is toxic or draining of them, I ask them, what is the cycle? What is the thing, the action, the person, the place that you want to stop engaging with, you want to stop doing, that you just can't? And I think that sometimes it really is as simple as that, saying like there's something that you and your heart and your mind want to stop doing. You don't enjoy how it makes you feel. You don't feel like it benefits you. And yet for some reason you can't stop it. That's how we know that there's often like not just a toxic root, but a root of pain and a root of trauma tied to the pattern is when there's something that we are like, I don't want this, I don't like this, I don't want to do this anymore, and yet we cannot stop doing it.
And can you give some examples of like what that might be? Because maybe
Oh my
someone
gosh.
like I know you wrote a lot in your book about
Uh-huh.
certain eating habits or just
Yeah.
like patterns of going back to someone, like different ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a good one might be like even the way some people engage in relationships. Like maybe you're someone who is constantly just going with what other people think or feel, right? So you might just be like, oh, yeah, that's fine. Oh, yeah, that's fine. When internally you have a different perspective or idea or suggestion. And then you hang out with a friend and they're like, oh, let's go eat here. You don't want to eat there. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's fine. But internally, you're like, why the heck did I just do that? I do not want to eat there. I don't want to do that. And I know this is just a small example, but sometimes the small, unassuming moments of our lives are tied to some of the deepest wounds that we have. And when we dismiss them because they're small, we miss that opportunity to step into that window of healing. And so for someone who is engaging in something that they don't want to do, but keep doing it, the question I would ask as they are in this trauma work, as they're walking towards healing, is if you could never engage in this pattern again, what emotion would you have to get acquainted with?
Mm.
If you could never reflexively be like, oh, yeah, I'm fine with that. If every time you spoke up what you truly desired and you couldn't please the people on the other end of the conversation, what emotion would you have to be acquainted with that you're not acquainted with right now?
Do you feel like all those are just symptoms of a deeper issue?
Oh, yeah. If we have a pattern that we can't change, it's usually tied to pain we haven't addressed,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because when you think, and I love talking about this because I love helping people see it's not about willpower.
Mm.
Sometimes it's like, well, if you know better, you do better. Sometimes, but not always,
Mm-hmm.
right? Sometimes there's kind of just this invisible wall that we keep running into and we don't know what it is, but we just can't get past it. We just can't stop doing it. We just can't stop people pleasing. We just can't stop seeing that person. Just can't stop having an extra drink when we don't want to. Like there's something internally motivating us to do something we don't want to do. And not just because it's like, oh, it's trying to force us to do things we don't want to do, because it's a way of us coping with an emotion that would come up if we didn't do that thing. Right. And so a lot of us were taught to not regard our emotions at all, not even well, like at all. It's don't feel like, don't be emotional, right? That's an insult. It's supposed to be an insult in our world. You're so
Yeah.
emotional. Don't be and yet God is emotional. We were made in the likeness of his emotions.
Mm-hmm.
God was so deeply moved with love that he gave Jesus to us, right? That action was rooted in an emotion, in love, in an affection for us. And so when we don't know how to regard our emotions, we don't like feeling them because we don't know what to do with them. We don't see them as messengers of information or signals of things that are going right or wrong in our lives, things that are celebratory or um, grieving. Instead, we just shut them down. And we don't just shut them down with words, we shut them down with our actions. And those are the patterns that we struggle to let go of.
Mm-hmm. So if someone like doesn't know how to pinpoint, because I know that that's very common that it's like we don't know what we feel or we suppress. I've been told that my whole life, and now
Mhm.
I realize I'm like I was in tune with my emotions, but I was always
Yeah.
told that like I'm too emotional.
Yeah.
But now I'm able to put them in into words, you know what I'm feeling. So for someone that maybe doesn't have that vocabulary or doesn't even know what to start with, I know that in your book you talked about how you feel it in your body
Hmm.
and how there are like triggers or signals that show us that there's things that, are there.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and thank you for bringing that up. It's so important for us to remember that feelings are not just this like spooky cloud over our heads. Feelings are experienced in our physical body. Feelings are physical sensations, right? So just because you're not acknowledging the emotion doesn't mean you're not feeling the emotion, right? And so we are all feeling the emotions. How do we know that? If someone steal something of yours and another person says, don't be mad, guess what? The hormones that are related to anger have already been released. And even when someone says, don't be mad, you physiologically can't not be mad in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now you may be able to guard yourself from situations that trigger that anger. But when you're already angry, saying don't be mad has never made anyone stop being mad, right? And so for people who do not have what we call emotional literacy, which is the ability to put words to an emotion, and then also the ability to explain why we're feeling that emotion, I would say turn inward to your body. Notice the patterns of what you feel in your body in certain situations. Notice the people you feel tense around. Notice the people you feel loose and free around. Notice the people you laugh around.
Mhm.
Notice the people you never laugh around, right?
Mhm.
Notice those things in your body. And then things like my book, things like therapy will help you put words to the patterns that you can begin to identify on your own. Because you may not know that it's anger, you may not know that it's sadness, but you may know there's something I feel around this person and I don't know why. And that's a great place to go to therapy and really do that investigating.
It's like sometimes it's feeling that tension within ourselves, or like when we talk about someone, it's like our heart rate, like starting to
Uh-huh.
be like, whew, like there's something there.
Yep, for
We don't know
sure.
like we don't know that that's one thing correlates to the other. We think that it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh no, it was in the past. And I know you talk a
Uh-huh.
lot about that. It's like how the past, I mean, we can't erase the past, but sometimes
Yeah.
we let it affect like our present and like it comes up in our present. So can you kind of go into how that looks like for someone?
Yeah, I think my favorite thing to tell my clients is that your past shows up in your present until you process it.
Mm.
And so a lot of us are letting the past stay in the present, not because we're like, oh, I could stop the past from affecting my present, but because we refuse to process it. Right. And what does it mean to process? To process is to look fully at the experiences we've had, to understand how we felt and understand how they affected our lives and how they affected the way that we interact with the world. Right. And so the only way to release, and first of all, we're never going to not remember the past. You
Mm-hmm.
can't just like make your brain forget. The goal is not to forget what happened. The goal is to extract the wisdom from the painful experience and apply that to your present,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because even scripture says, like, who's more likely to forgive? Someone who's forgiven little or someone who's forgiven much, who's been forgiven much? Well, because the person has a history of being forgiven much, they have a wisdom of empathy, right? And that's why they're more likely to forgive. So the goal is not to forget what we've been through. The goal is to not relive it every single day in our present, right? Because trauma will leave us living in loops, living the same story over and over again as the same character with different people in a different setting unless we do something about it and break out of the mental mold of what that story told us, right? I mentioned that in the book. We live in the stories we tell ourselves, but the stories that we tell ourselves are based on the experiences we've had.
Mm-hmm.
And so to tell a new story, you have to have new experiences. But to have new experiences means you have to step out of the story that you've been told about yourself. And I think that's why things like this podcast are so important because you may not even be realizing that you're living in a story. You may not realize that you're living in a story of inferiority. You're living in a story of I can't do it. You're living in a story of that could never be me. Um, and when you get that inkling that okay, I think I'm living in this cycle of always thinking I can't do things, you get the opportunity now to step out and say, obviously with support, to say like I'm going to step into this new thing as if I can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that that was powerful that you had that written because I remember in my own therapy session, like when she went through like your core lies, like what you've
Mm.
been telling yourself, it was like a list that it was like, I don't feel enough, like exactly what you just said, like it kind of breaking down like things that we believe about ourselves that in some way shape or form like our experiences we started telling ourselves that, and sometimes
Yep.
people told us that stuff, but other times experiences made us believe to confirm what we already think about ourselves.
Yes.
And I didn't know I was walking in that. Like I was walking in the feeling of like I have to change to be loved. I'm
Yep.
not enough as I am.
Yep.
I will never fit in. Like I'm always been rejected. Like so I
Yep.
I felt like I was walking in that consistently. And that's still something that like I walk through in my with my own therapist. But
Yep.
I how can someone kind of reframe that thinking? Because it's like you've been
Mm.
saying these things to yourself for so long because either others told you or you've been telling yourself that. So how
Yeah.
kind of start seeing like, okay, this is not true. Like this is
Yeah.
what I've been telling myself.
Oh, yeah. First, I think that identifying the core lie, like you were talking about, like what I call the negative core belief, identifying that first. Because a lot of us are trying to reframe because we know we feel something negative, but we don't know exactly what we feel. We just know, like, I just don't like myself, right? And so being able to say, what is the specific lie that I have been believing about myself? And I love trauma work because I think that trauma work is very clear, even if the process is complicated. So, what that looks like is saying, what is my core lie? Well, if you're someone who can't, who doesn't know what the core lie is, what is the reflexive thing you say to yourself when things go wrong? I'm
Mhm.
so stupid. This is why no one ever loves me. This is why I'll never have any close friends. This is why everybody leaves me, right? Our brain runs to like this lie. It's almost like an emotional blankie that makes us feel deeply rejected, but also almost a little bit safe because it helps us feel like the world around us is more predictable.
Mhm.
But when we find that lie, now it's our job to betray that lie, right? To say, if I believed the absolute opposite of what this lie was saying, what would I do? Now, that is a terrifying feeling.
Yeah.
Like, if I believe that I could be deeply loved, if I believe that I am the one for somebody, if I believe that what I do can change the world, how would I show up? That's hard, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I say therapy work is clear, even if it's complicated, because it's clear like what we should be living out. It's clear what we should be stepping into, but it's complicated to unweave ourselves from the lies of what we've been told about ourselves. And you said something really powerful. Sometimes we tell it to ourselves, and sometimes it's what someone has told us.
Mhm.
And I think it's important for us to remember when it comes to friendships, when it comes to faith communities, when it comes to even family, we absorb the voices of the people around us.
Mhm. That's so true.
Like, have you ever had someone like jokingly make fun of you and then you do something and in your head, you're like, oh, well, I don't want to do that because I don't want this person to think this about me. Or
Mhm.
last time they made fun of me for wearing an outfit twice, so I'm not going to do that again. Right. We absorb the voices of the people around us. That's true of childhood, but it's also true of adulthood.
Mhm.
Right. And so, like, all of us need to be prioritizing people. Trauma work is already hard.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know that from being in therapy. I'm in therapy too. I'm a therapist and I have my own therapist.
Mhm.
Trauma work is hard. It's hard when you're helping people through it, and it's hard when you're doing it for yourself. And one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves are people around us who will speak words that push us along our journey instead of drag us back into who we're trying to step out of.
Mm. That's
And I think we just have to remember that, like, when you're fighting, they're either for you or against you. And I know that sounds really like black and white, but I don't mean that as in like they have to do everything for you. But I'm saying, are there words to you reflecting the healing you want, or are there words pulling you back into a place of like the hurt that you're trying to heal?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's so true. I talk a lot about that, about the power of like the people that you have around you.
Yeah.
I know like I grew up in like with toxic friendships that I was always like kind of bullied in their friendships, but they felt
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
And as an adult, I see how like I really believe like people were always going to use me, people were always going to, like these things that I thought were so normal
Mhm.
until
Yeah.
I like went through my therapy work and also like started making like healthy friendships where it's like they want the best for you. They're supporting you. There's no jealousy.
Yep.
There's no like putting you down for them to feel better about themselves. And I feel like now being surrounded as an adult with healthy friendships, I see that that's possible. But
Yeah.
when I was younger, how I didn't have that community, I didn't think that that was possible. I was like, oh, your
Mhm.
friends don't like your friends aren't jealous or like controlling over you,
Mhm.
you know? So I
Yeah.
think that's so true. Like if you never see it around you, like it also doesn't like it doesn't seem that hopeful either, you know?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And again, that talks directly to stepping out, because
Mhm.
it's not until you start like healing that you realize it's not normal. And I
Mhm.
think that a lot of us can feel that sense of hopelessness in our in our healing journey because we think that what we've experienced is all we'll experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true. There's so much more to experience if you step out of what you know and step into something new that you don't know. Because right now, what you know is hurting you. What
Mm-hmm.
you know is leaving you sad and anxious and depressed. And it's worth the risk. You're worth the risk of saying, I want to try something different, even if that different means going to therapy. Like I remember I was just talking to a friend the other day. I remember in college saving up my little money my parents used to send me every single month and not telling a single soul and walking to a therapist's office every Tuesday at 3:15.
Oh, wow.
I was like, I can't live like this anymore. I
Mm-hmm.
can't, like, I'm not even asking if you guys believe in therapy or not. I just know I'm at my wit's end and I need help. And I believe that if I step out even an inch out of my little bubble, that God's going to show up. And he did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes it takes that like the bold and courageous, like nobody understands or
Yeah.
nobody, you're like the first one in your family or you're the first one in your circle, but then you see how like that's transformative and God
Yeah.
uses that in our lives because it's not only like our faith journey, which I know you talk a lot about like you can be spiritually mature, but it doesn't mean like emotionally or like
Yep.
because you haven't healed through some things and I know like in my generation, like my grandma, which I love her so much, but she has
Yeah.
a lot of unhealed trauma, but she's such a
Yeah.
faith like warrior. So it's just like,
Mhm.
it's just
Yeah.
interesting how
It
those things
is.
play out, but you see how the relationships, what comes out of someone when they're not doing the interior, like inside work.
Mhm.
So both are important.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And they inform each other.
Hmm.
I think that for a lot of us, we know only how to fight. We
Hmm.
know only how to be warriors, but
Hmm.
we know only how to be servants, but we don't know how to be children. We
Hmm.
don't know how to just be God's kids. It's Jesus who says, I no longer call you servants, but I call you friend. I call you someone close to me, someone I want to be around, not someone who has to be around. Right. And like sometimes we get so focused on like obedience and subservitude and submission and all those things are essential to the faith. Yes. But you can do all of that and not be a friend. The
Hmm.
difference between a friend and a servant is a friend knows the will because the friend has intimacy. And a lot of us know how to serve, but we don't have intimacy with God, and that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And so we're wondering why we keep getting so tired, so weary, so overwhelmed in our faith is because we only know how to fight now. You need to know how to fight for sure. So
Mhm.
I'm not saying the old generation got it wrong. I just think that this generation is being called to build upon what the older generation has offered us in love and respect.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's what I love about our generation. I'm like, I feel like it's the fight to also have healthier family dynamics and work in ourselves to not pass down. Not that we're gonna do it perfect, but
Yeah.
like working through some stuff.
Yeah.
So what are some like last thoughts for someone that, we talked about breaking cycles, the thoughts
Mhm.
that kind of are like the limiting beliefs that we set from, things that we've experienced, but how about someone that's like, okay, what do I do now? Or like, how can I break this? Or how is this healing journey going to look like for me now?
Yeah. Well, the healing journey is going to look so individual. Healing is as individual as our trauma is.
Mhm.
For everyone, it's going to look different. But, I have like this internal model. I call it BACC, BACC. If you want to engage in this journey of healing and continue in this journey of healing, the four things you need boundaries, you need acceptance of yourself, you need courage, and you need community, right? Boundaries help us create environments where we thrive. Acceptance help us remember that we're doing this because we love ourselves, not hate ourselves. Courage helps us remind ourselves that we don't know our limits. Trauma tells us we have our limits are limited, but really we are limitless in Christ. And then community helps us reflect back to ourselves what we forget about ourselves.
Mhm.
And so, if you're on the healing journey, whether you're in therapy or out, you should be in. Um, I would always go back to like that cornerstone of boundaries, acceptance, courage, and community. Um, because when you are like assessing in your life, where am I on the scale of these things? If something's off kilter, there's always one of those that's like weak, right?
Mhm.
Maybe you have boundaries, but maybe you're only setting boundaries because you're mad at somebody and not because you love yourself, right? So I would encourage them to assess that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good place to start. And I'll write it in the notes as well so that you guys can go back to that. Thank you, Kobe, for sharing. Like you're such a someone that's like very calming, you know, when you speak and just very
Oh, thank you.
educational. And so thank you for sharing with us today. And where can people connect with you and find your book?
Yeah, you guys can connect with me on social media at Kobe Campbell, that's underscore, which is KOBECAMPBELL underscore. You can grab my book literally everywhere, Target, Books a Million, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, or you can go to my website, www.kobecampbell.com/book, and you'll get all those retailers there. Yeah, I love to serve. I have a podcast called the Healing Circle Podcast and a practice here in Charlotte, North Carolina called the Healing Circle Therapy and Wellness Center. We are providing counseling, coaching, and intensives. It's me and my dear friend Maria, and we provide services in English and Spanish.
That's amazing. I love the work that you're doing. And I want to go to one of your, I don't know if you're doing it again this year, the getaways.
Yes.
Yes, I would love to go. It seems
Yeah.
amazing.
They are. They really are. I'm working on it. I literally just got off a call this morning
Okay.
where some people were like low key bullying me. They're like, "What are the dates?" And I was like, "I'm
Yeah.
working on it. I'm working on it."
I know you have
So
a
yeah,
lot going on, but it's all like I want to just say that like the work that you're doing is amazing because it's so needed in the faith community as well as just making things so practical for people to understand and hear and see and have hope ultimately that there is healing that can be done in their life. So thank you for what you do.
thank you. Thank you for being a listener and engaging. And it's so funny. You like do stuff and then you get to meet the people who actually on the receiving end. And it's such a blessing to feel like, oh God, you said this was touching people. And it really is. So I just appreciate you reaching out and being patient with me as we've scheduled this. Y'all, it's been like a year. She has
Yeah.
been so incredible in this entire process. So I so am grateful to be here and share on your podcast.
No, awesome. Thank you so much, Kobe, for that. And just one last thought.
Yeah.
What would you say to your younger self in the healing process that can be encouraging for someone today?
Do the thing that you know you need to do, but seems too scary to do, because that's what's going to change your life.
Mm, wow.
Yeah.
So good. So good. Do the scary thing you need to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Kobe. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into this week's podcast episode. I hope you were encouraged and make sure to follow, subscribe to this podcast, leave a review if you haven't, and I will see you guys next week.